Hello friends, welcome to the part 4 of Crud operations in AngularJS. Now in part 3 we have created an AngularJS factory to interact with the server-side controller. We have also created our partials and respective controllers and routes. Now in this part we are going to wire up different components we have created in previous video. For an example, we have created addplayer.html and we have rendered a form on that HTML, but we haven't posted that form anywhere. So in this video we are going to post that form to AngularJS controller. From AngularJS controller, using the factory we have created, we will post that to MVC controller, and finally that data will be saved to the database. Then we are going to show all the players saved in the database on the main page in a grid structure, and we will have edit and delete link on that grid, and then on click of edit we can edit a particular player, and then we can have a update functionality, and finally we will also implement delete functionality on the grid. So this is how we are going to wire up different components. So let's start with it. So this is the factory I have which we have created in part 3. These are the two controllers we have added in part 3. These are the respective views, that is edit player and add player.html partials, and we have also added their respective route, that is add player and edit player /id. So in order to start with the work, so we have to start with addplayer.html. Now this is the application looks like. This is my main page, and to go to add player I have to specify the add player route, so it will take me to the add player partial. So this is the form. Currently it is not posting to anywhere, so let's wire it up. Now if you go to app.js, you will search for add player route. So you can see it will use addplayer.html partial and it will use addplayer.controller. So basically we are going to post our form to this controller. So let's go to addplayer.html. So this is my form. So in order to submit, we use ng submit directive, and we have to specify a function which will accept this form data. So the function name is addPlayer. So this function we have not created yet, but we will create on addPlayer controller. Now when this form is posted, when this form is submitted using a submit button, the form is posted to this function. So let's go to the player, go to controller.js, and we go to addPlayer controller, and in this we are going to create the function on the scope. So our function name is addPlayer. We'll pass anonymous function, and then we will show a simple alert for now saying hello world. Now if I refresh my page and enter some data and submit the form, so you can see an alert being shown. So this shows that our function is getting called. Now instead of calling this function, we are going to call a factory function, that is addPlayer, which will post our data to the server side. So in order to use this factory in our controller, we have to specify this as a dependency so that AngularJS will resolve it for us, and then we can use this object. So for that you have to specify that service name in the controller as a parameter, so that will be resolved by AngularJS. So that is why we have a name for a factory, and then you can use this object inside addPlayer function to call addPlayer method, and then we have to pass player object that is presenting or on our scope. So this will call the add function at the server side, and it will save data to the server. So this is the reason why we have object structure in our view like this, player.name, player.club, so that we can just accessing the player object we get values for all the properties. Now let's refresh our view and see whether it is going to the server side. So we will add some data. Okay, you can see it has posted to addPlayer JSON result function, and if you check, all the values have been populated in the properties through model binding. And if I continue this debugger, the code first approach will create database for us. It will add player into the database, and you can see the callback function has been called and alert being shown. Now if I go to my database and check if I have records in my table, so you can see Code First Approach has created this database Crud demo, and it has inserted one data in players table as well. Similarly, let's add one more player, double check it. And let's add some dummy values. We will update these values when we will implement update and edit functionality. So let's go to the database and check whether we have 3 players. So you can see we have 3 records in the database. Now our next part is to render these 3 records on our main page. So our main page is this list of players, and we name it as player.html. So player list.html is our main page. Currently we have only a header and a message being shown. So first I have to know which controller is connected to this player. So if I player HTML, so you can see this is the default route. So we will render player list.html and we will use main controller. Now when this view is rendered, we have to fetch the entire data from database in the controller, and we have to set it on a scope object, and then we have to bind that scope object on the partial. So let's go to its controller. So ideally its controller is this main controller. Now inside this controller, as we are going to use player service, so we have to specify it in the parameter so that it will be resolved by AngularJS using dependency injection. Then inside the function we will use player service dot get players from database. We are not going to pass any parameters, and then we will use then function, which will be called when the get request is successful, and then we will have a callback function receiving the response from the server side, and we will set a variable that is list players from the response that is sent from the server side. And if I go to the player controller, you can see this function will be called, that is get players, and it returns a list variable or object. So we have to specify list here. So the entire player list will be in this object list players. Now we are going to bind this list players on our main HTML. So I'm going to bind it to a table structure. So I have a table. The first tr will have some table headers corresponding to our properties like name, club, country, and finally the age. Then the next tr we are going to iterate over the list players. So in AngularJS you iterate using ng repeat, saying player in an object is list players, and then inside that I will create table data, and I will use expression to bind that data using player dot, the property name is name. Similarly I'll do that for club, country, and age. So what ngRepeat does, it iterates over all the players and it creates that number of table rows and bind the data to the grid. So let's see if it works. So I just have to refresh the page. Okay, you can see the data. So the controller has fetched data from the database, bind it to a scope variable, and then we have used that scope variable to iterate over the data and binded it in a table structure. Let's have some more functionality here. So we will have a counter which will display the number of players. So we will do that by using $index variable of AngularJS. It starts with 0, so we have to increment by 1. So we also have a counter. Now we are going to have add edit and delete functionality on the grid. So we need to have two empty table headers for edit and delete. Similarly we will have two two table data for edit and delete. So you can see. Now we will render this as a link when we start working on that. Now when we click on edit, we want a edit page to be rendered and route to be changed, and a form will be rendered. So in order to do that, we have to have an anchor tag here, and we have to set its href attribute to a route so that that particular URL is requested and that particular HTML is rendered based on connected controller. So if you go to app.js, the route for edit player is /edit player, and you have to pass the ID of a player which you want to edit. Alright, so the default route we specify using hash, then we have to call our route, that is edit player, / we have to pass the ID. So ID we can get it from player object, that is player ID. Alright, and then let's close this anchor tag and we will text it as edit. If I refresh my page and if I edit the first record, you can see the URL, that is edit player 1, so it is basically editing the first record. Similarly, if I click on edit for the third record, it will edit records for the 3. Now when I edit a player, the data for that player should be pre-populated in my controls. So basically, in order to do that, we have to go to the controller which is connected to this player, fetch the record for a particular player as we have done in the main page, and then we will bind it on a variable or object, and then we will use that object to pre-populate the fields. So if I go to app.js, I'll check which controller and partial is connected to this route. So it is connected to edit player and edit player controller. So edit player.html, so this is my form and it is connected to controller, that is edit player. So here is our connected controller. Now it is obvious that we are going to use player service, so we will specify as a parameter in our controller, and then we are going to call player service dot get player by ID, and we have to pass a ID to this function, so where we are getting that ID from. Now when we are clicking on edit link, this controller is get called, so we have to find some mechanism to get that ID from the URL or the route. So when we want some ID from the URL or route, we have to use a service, that is route params. So this service object will facilitate ID from the route, and so that we have to accept it as a parameter so that it will be resolved as dependency injection by the AngularJS. So in order to fetch ID, we will say ID is equal to our route param service dot the name of the route ID you are passing. So if you go to app.js, we have specified it as ID, so we will use the same ID key to fetch the data. Alright, so we have ID with us, then we have to pass this ID to this function, and we will use then function, which will be called when the request is successful. We will have a callback function where we will get data from the server side, that is response from the server side, and then we will set it on scope dot player object d.data dot, and the variable we are sending it from the server side is, this is the function which will be called player, so we have to specify the same variable here. Now if you check, we have used player object on the scope which will hold the player data based on a particular ID. Now if you go to edit player, these controls are binded to player object itself. So what happens when the view will be rendered, the data will be pre-populated based on this object structure. Alright, so our controller work is done. So if I refresh my view, I'll be able to see the data. You can see the data has been populated. If I go back to main page, if I edit my second record, the data will be as per that second record. So we are done with the edit functionality. Now we want this edit form to be more precise or more functionable using update functionality. So if I make any changes here in this form, I want it to be updated to the database, so that if I go to the main page, that data will be updated on the grid. So similarly to the add functionality, we will post this form data using ng submit directive, and we will post it to update player function. As you know, this partial is connected to edit player controller. We will have this update player function in that controller itself. So here we will create it on the scope, that is scope dot update player, and we will have anonymous function. So we will be using player service, and we will call update player function. We will pass the player data on the scope using scope.player, and that's it. So let's refresh our view and let's go back and edit this dummy data. Let's add some varied values. And I will click on update. You can see player updated successfully. Let's go to database to check. You can see database, in the database the third record is modified as per our recently added values. If I go to main page, that values are updated here as well. So this is how we have implemented edit and update in a very simple way. Now the last thing comes is the delete functionality. So let's go to our main page. Now on click of delete link, we don't want to render any separate page, so we are just, or separate route we want to call, we're just going to call a function which will delete the record from the database. So let's do that. So we are going to have an anchor tag with the text delete, and then we are going to set href attribute, which is we have to specify set to hash, that is default route, and then we will call a function. So in order to call a function, we will say ng click, we will use ng click directive, and let's name the function as delete player. And to this delete player function, we are going to pass the id. As you will go to the controller.js, if you go to the factory function, it needs the id of the player which you want to delete. So from this main page, or from the grid, we are going to pass the id of a player, so that is present in our player object. So we will pass that as a function parameter, and this function we will create in our main controller, because this partial is connected to main controller. So we will go to the main controller, and here we will create that function on our scope, and we will accept one id. Okay, so that we will do, this will be the name, and we will pass anonymous function. Here we are going to accept one id, and then we will use player service dot delete player function. We will pass that id, so that id will be deleted. So let's see if that works or not. So we will delete the third record. So I click on delete. So you can see it is showing player deleted successfully. An alert function, alert window is shown. Now if you notice, that is not deleted from the UI because it has not been deleted from the scope object. So if you refresh it, the scope will be refreshed, and then it gets removed from the grid. So in order to remove it from the scope before removing it from the database, we're also going to pass index here. So in order to pass index, we will say $index, and that index we will remove it from our scope list. So the players are stored in list players dot splice function we will use, and we want to splice a particular index from the list, and only one. So what it does is it removes that data from list players, and as our grid is binded to list players, it refreshes and the data will be removed. So let's refresh our page and see whether it works or not. So I'm going to remove the second record. So I click on delete. Alright, there is some problem. $index is not defined. Alright, so okay. Alright, we have not accepted as a parameter here, so we will say index. Alright, silly mistake. So let's refresh my page. Let me close my developer tool. And I click delete for the second record. You can see the player has deleted from the list as well and from the database as well. So if I go to database, if I check, I'll be having only single player. So this is how we have implemented delete functionality as well. Now we will have some small things which will facilitate the navigation. So I will have a link here which will take me to the add player. So we will specify that hash is for the default route, and we will specify the route for add player, and we will text it to add player. Similarly, on the add player, I want to go to our main page quite often, so I will say back to main, and the default route we specify using hash. Similarly, from edit, I want to go to main page, so I will say to main again, and I will have default route being specified in href. Let's look at it. So if I click on add player, it will take me to add player. I'll fill in details and go back to main to check whether the details are present or not. I can edit it, I can update the details, I can go back to main page so that to check whether the details are being submitted to database or not. So this is how we have implemented simple add, edit and delete functionality using a grid-like structure in AngularJS. Now in the next part we are going to improve the style or CSS for this grid and entire forms we have created till now. So please do watch that video as well.